Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You can see myself and hearing on the broadcast right now. We're broadcasting this and recording it just so everyone knows. We're very much looking forward to the next 45 minutes to an hour, and are grateful for your attendance. So let me minimize a few things here on my screen and make sure everyone can see my presentation. I think that's okay. Is everybody, you're seeing my screen, aren't you?
Yeah, correct.
Right, good stuff. So yeah, you've got myself, Hearing, and my colleague Sean Meyer on the call today. The plan, I can page down. The plan is to do a little bit about us, DWS, to talk about functional testing opportunity, talk about test automation drivers, explain DWS strategy as it relates to going to market with testing, and then to hand over to Hearing, who's going to tell a little bit about what they do and what they're doing. They're a customer of ours. They use Swift Test, the product that we're talking about, with one of their offerings, and they sell services as well. So Hearing will explain what they're doing, why they do it, and what that feels like. And then everybody always likes to see software, so we've invited Sean along, and Sean's going to do a quick demonstration of Swift Test, and then we'll wrap up with a close and some questions and answers. So that's the plan. And in the interest of time, I'm going to crack on, and I'm not going to spend too much time introducing DWS. As for myself, I've been around JD Edwards for a long time. I think my first exposure was all the way back in 1988 or 89, and I worked for Oracle, JD Edwards, and PeopleSoft for 18 years. And then I went off and did some other things, and then I came back to the JD Edwards community with DWS about 5 years ago. DWS is a gold partner. There's a few points there related to, that explain who we are and what we do. Obviously, what we're talking about today is DWS as a software vendor, and we're showing you our Swift Test product, talking about scripting and automation. And our scripting and automation tool works for both JD Edwards Enterprise One as well as the Oracle Fusion Cloud applications. So I think Sean's going to show Swift Test with JD Edwards today, but we could just as easily show Swift Test working with one of the Oracle Fusion Cloud applications as well. So that's a little bit about me and about DWS. When we think about scripting and automation and easing the burden of testing, it's useful to sort of reflect on the functional testing opportunity. With JD Edwards, we hear people talk about continuous innovation all the time. With JD, we have choice and control. We get to run projects when we want to run projects. But there is, there's pressure, or at least talk about getting companies on JD Edwards to run more projects and to stay code current. Just in the last couple of weeks, there was an announcement, JD Edwards release 22, and there'll be a release 23, 24, going forward in years to come. And you can, ideally, folks will get current and stay current with those releases as they go forward. With cloud apps, you've got to even, you've got no choice. You get regularly quarterly updates, and the thread here, is that companies are running more projects and are thinking about running more projects. And as part of every single software project, enterprise software application project, there is functional regression testing. So there's a real benefit to doing a better job of testing. It saves money, it improves the quality of the projects that you're running and things like that. And if you aren't convinced, anecdotally, talking to customers over the years, we hear people say that, anywhere from a quarter to 25 to 65% of the time that they commit to a project is associated with testing and testing activities. And when you go beyond just a project and you think about QA spend and QA activities within an IT organization, the World Quality Report 2021, has a couple of good graphics in there where they're showing, as much as 22% of IT budgets, are dedicated or allocated to QA activities, and of that, of the total QA budgets, about a third of that spend, over the years, is on software and tools like the Dimension Swift Test product that you're going to see today. So that's kind of interesting, and the opportunity is very, very real. There's savings to be had and quality improvements to be made by doing a better job of testing. In JD Edwards land, specifically, where you have choice and control about when you run projects. So, a lot of people say they don't run as many projects as they might because testing is difficult. And when you dig in and you find out and you ask them, why do they say testing is difficult? They come up with a list of things like this. When they get an update or when they apply, move to a new release, with the latest terminology, they don't know exactly what's changing and what needs to be tested. And it can be challenging to plan and manage the testing, and it can be difficult to script and edit scripts, in the context of a project and testing for a project. So I'm not going to read every single one of those, but I'll leave that there for a second, and, just let you look at that. But those are the sorts of challenges that we need to overcome, in the context of the testing opportunity, the benefit, the return of tackling and addressing the testing problem. Let's talk about what test automation delivers very briefly. I come back to this idea that, we want to run more projects. With cloud apps, you don't have a choice. You have to run quarterly updates. As part of every single one of those quarterly updates, you're going to do testing. If you get really good at running those projects, they can be, quite small and well managed and slick. You can do them quickly. And you can impress your user community with your ability to keep the software up to date. And by having software that's always at the latest and greatest level, you as a supplier of IT business services to the wider business are going to be able to deliver value sooner. With scripting and automation and with testing in general, there's an opportunity to take advantage of the repeatability of testing. You test the same things over and over and over again. Every single update, every single release, is going to see the same sort of functionality needing to be tested. And by automating your testing, you can make it seamlessly repeatable, and you can reduce the risk associated, the risk of, or the chance of going live with software that, that doesn't work. Now, in cloud apps, some people have said that, Oracle's done all the testing. I don't feel like I need to do that. But that really, given, the nature of enterprise software and how configurable it is and how, parameterizable it is, it's really important, that you do validate and make sure, that the way you have implemented and the way you use the software continues to work with each project. So with test automation, we've got something that's repeatable, that reduces risk, and that makes the testing job easier. We are reducing the amount of time and effort that's required in order to get through the testing activities of any project. You're never going to automate, you're never going to script and automate absolutely everything, but you should be asking yourselves the question, or there's an opportunity to ask yourselves the question, if I can make this happen automatically, how much time am I going to save and how much energy am I going to save? Because the cost associated writing scripts and creating scripts isn't that significant. So there's an investment you can make that will deliver return over and over and over again. Presenting today with Cadran and hearing, it's interesting because when we look at ourselves and we talk about what testing does, how testing adds value, from a Cadran perspective, testing adds value by strengthening the relationship they have with their end customers. They're able to, encourage and help their customers use our testing products, but they can also use our testing products. And hearing will talk about that. So, we're trying to provide a service to the community, if you will, having brought, our testing products to market. So our strategy, when you think about it, has really been to, deliver, the best products for testing JD Edwards and Oracle Cloud applications in the market. And we think best is achieved by making solutions that are really, really user-friendly and are familiar to and are aware of the applications that are being tested. We talk about Swift Test being application aware, and Swift Test effectively reads screens and helps you test what you're seeing on a screen and you're able to do on a screen. And Sean will show you that. So, the user friendliness and the application aware nature of the solutions are fundamental to us. And with what we're doing today, we're putting a spotlight on testing. We're asking companies, systems integrators and end customers alike to think about testing smarter and doing a better job of testing. And we're selling, directly to end customers, like some of you that are on the call today. But at the same time, we're encouraging systems integrators like Cadran, and we have other partners around the globe as well, that are providing services to their customers that are what we call dimension driven. And those systems integrators, like Cadran, sign up as partners. They sell the services, and they use our software and resell our software to end companies as well. So that's a little bit about who we are and what we're doing. At this point, I'll invite you to sort of chime in, hearing, and say hello and tell your story.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patrick. Honored to have a joint webinar, and like you said, it's a tough subject sometimes, the testing. So if you go to the next slide, from a Cadran perspective. Little background about Cadran. We are a consultancy partner established in early 1998, so almost 23 years ago. Focused on the Netherlands and Belgium. More than 45 JD Edwards consultants. The company is slightly bigger because we also have NetSuite staff. And what we do, we focused on implementation of JD Edwards. Rollouts from other countries, upgrades, support managed services, and also look at the current situation with the cloud infrastructure migrations. Our markets are mainly on the industrial manufacturing, wholesale, and of course commodity trading with our own CTRM project. But also in the food market, we support JD Edwards customers as well. Although we are focusing on Netherlands and Belgium, if you go to the next one, we are part of Redfaire International. As co-founder, what we have seen is that, the Netherlands is, although very nice, but not always that big for JD Edwards, and there are a lot of customers who are worldwide, so more regions, etc. So Cadran has a joint venture with two others, Redfaire in the UK and FSS in Switzerland, and with 8 other partners in all other countries. We now have a global support of managed services, for example, but also connection for rollouts to from the US or to the US or Australia or other parts. The whole Redfaire International has more than 650 employees, a lot of JD Edwards knowledge, so we also know in several areas and market areas where we go to. And that's also a big part if you go to a rollout and you see about the testing, because it might be that in Holland, for example, the localizations are quite different than from another part. And then testing is becoming more and more important. So if you go to the next slide, what we are seeing is that, of course, testing is in a project a lot of time spending by key users. It's also learning on the job, but most of the time it's repeating. And if you are going through an upgrade or smaller updates in a later phase of the project, then sometimes only that part is tested, because the other things are, yeah, that's okay, it's not there. But every change in the software in the ERP system is becoming more and more important to check the whole system, that it still runs the business as you expect it to be. So looking at automated testing, yes, of course, you can outsource it, you can let other people do it. But if you look at the scripts and the business process, which is actually for your business the most value, in our belief, yeah, you can automate, say, about 80% of those processes using a tool like DWS, and make sure that repeatedly it will come over. And that's also the main thing of the delivery of that part, looking at how you test it, following the script in a structured way, and make sure that every time it's done again. Preferable by night, but yeah, how do you do that with people? Well, with automated testing, you can do that. And if you go to the next one, what our benefits are is that it's not the definition of the test scripting, because although we do have test scripts which are for general sales order entry or whatever, each company has its own specific test scripts with data, with programs, etc. So the investment you are doing in defining the scripts is still there, but the repeating of the testing at every time during the project, but also when something happens in the market and you need to postpone and go live, and you want to retest it again, by automating the testing, it challenge out the people who are necessary for that, and you can focus only on the part that is still necessary there. The benefit is also that every time the tests are run, you have a documentation. Each step, which is normally done by a person but now automated, is documented, and you can use that documentation for saying, okay, the tests are okay, but you can also use the documentation for showing to your end users how things are done. So use it as a user manual. And for Cadran, that was very important that for our own CTRM solution, for example, which is quite a large module, it is not only validating that the software, which is evolving every time, still works as it should be, but you can also have at that time up-to-date documentation, which eliminates every time the screenshots people are used to making in creating user documentation. So it's both ways. Testing is done repeatedly, structured at the same time. You could do it multiple times, scheduled on the fly, and it will consistently do the testing and create the documentation. And from Cadran as a project approach, what we are now doing is that we will make it part of our upgrade or implementation as a service. So at first, we can help you by doing the building of the scripts, and then validate with you when the handover is there, to make sure that the test scripts and the business process that are done, that we can repeatedly do that. And for our own IP solutions like CTRM, we ship it already with our module together with the developed test scripts we already have, because we are setting it up like a standard module, and ship it out already with the test scripts as well, so that after the instruction and implementation at the customer, we run the scripts, check that the software is working, and then hand over. And how are we doing that at our customers? If we go to the next one. Of course, like I mentioned, Cadran is a customer itself from DWS software because we run it on our CTRM module, for example. Other CTRM clients, Hoogweg, Interfood, and Groen. Groen is still in the implementation phase, but Hoogweg and Interfood are already running for quite some time on JD Edwards, and with rollouts to other companies, with updates from both the software, changes in the business, but also the updates from Oracle. So either it's an apps application update or a tools update. Every time all the scripts will be run again just to validate that the system is working as expected. We did it at Van Sillevold Rijst. They did an upgrade from 8 something to 9.2. We start working with the test scripts in the old version because it's still JD Edwards and it's still web-based. So we can use the DWS software to build up those test scripts. And when the new system was ready in a parallel system, we just switched the library from test scripts from the old URL to the new URL, and we could run instantly the same processes checking at the new version. So it's not that you have to wait until the system is available. You can start whenever you have your system ready in Edwards. And when upgrading, you can just check with your new parallel system if those same business processes are running against the new software. And that's very powerful. And last but not least, ProConcept is currently in an upgrade system, and we are building up at the same principle like we did at Van Sillevold Rijst. Making sure that we validate the business processes as is now, and whenever the update is there, we can check the updated software. So that's in short how Cadran approaches and why we are believing in automated testing. Like Patrick's saying, it's not the holy grail, it's not 100%, but if you can have 80% of your testing time eliminated by automated, it's an investment worth.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. It is definitely an investment worth making from a project testing perspective. And I always make sure I mention the fact that as we finish projects and get ready to hand over the business, there's always a sort of an end user validation sort of training, acceptance testing sort of phase, and doing a really good job of testing. Doing a very good job of testing and documenting the testing that you do as a project team can help the conversation you have to have with end users, and it can help them get through the user acceptance testing more quickly. We've got experience of customers that have gone live early, because of all of the good work that they did from, as a project team, that the users were much more quick. We're much quicker in signing off, their acceptance. So let's look at the software, and in principle, I've got a slide here that just sort of reminds everyone what it is we're trying to do. Testing as part of a project is very, it's the same thing over and over again. We always plan and prepare. We execute our tests, document results. And in the context of any one project, you would expect to have to rerun some tests and do retesting of aspects of the solution. And what we're doing with Swift Test is, compressing that time that it takes, taking time out of the project, taking effort out of the project, and making it better. That's what we're trying to achieve. And we've done that with, we think we've done that or given you something with Swift Test that'll help you do that. The key things that you sort of want to be aware of, which I mentioned earlier, is the business-friendly nature of the software, and the fact that the software is application aware. Sean will talk about that, and he'll talk about and show you what's happening with Swift Test and JD Edwards, or with Swift Test and Oracle Cloud applications. Sean will also point out that there's a separation between the data that's being used, or can be separation between the data that's being used to facilitate your testing and the tests themselves. We can write tests with soft code, they can be soft coded. We don't have to hard code data in our tests. We can remove the data from the tests themselves, and we can create end-to-end business processes. We can replicate end-to-end business processes by putting scripts together in what we call queues, to test order to cash or procure to pay, those sorts of things. So that is a point at which I'm going to hand over to Sean and let Sean show you the software. So Sean, can I introduce you? I'm just making you the presenter now, and I'll let you share your screen. Great.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. Yes, we can.
Okay, so we are going to start off today in the Dimension Hub, which is our online portal for our software and our services. And here we're looking at a high-level dashboard overview of what's been going on in this particular environment for last month. And here we can drill into the different hierarchies in Swiftus. So at the top level, you've got a list of projects. Each project is made up of one or more scenarios, and each scenario is made up of one or more tests. We are on purpose unopinionated about how you set this up, because every organization's got a different idea about how you should structure this, and different naming conventions. But one way that we've seen customers use this really successfully is to create a base catalog. So this is a library of tests that at any point you can click play on and run all of those tests and test your system end to end to make sure that it's working as expected. But the idea is you don't do your testing in the base catalog. And maybe you've even got several base catalogs. Maybe there's one per module, or just however you think that's best to set this up. But whenever there's a testing event, like a sales order entry modification, maybe you've got to test all of sales or a part of sales, or maybe it's something big like an upgrade to 9.2, where you've really just got to test the whole system end to end. Or maybe it's something like applying an ESU or a bunch of ESUs to get code current. But whatever the reason is for your testing, whatever this testing event is, the idea is you copy your base catalog, either the whole thing or just parts of it, to create one of these testing projects. And this is where you do your actual testing. This will keep track of who ran the test, how long it took, did it pass, did it fail. Swiftus is self-documenting, so it'll store all of this history, and from that history you can create generate reports to hand to auditors. It'll keep all of the information that proves that you did the testing that you were supposed to. And at the end of the process, if you've made any changes to the tests in the course of this execution project, because J.D. Edwards is a system that changes a lot. It's you apply an ESU, you can make a mod, you can even just change a processing option, and that can change the whole flow of an application. So if these tests change at all, the idea is you copy them back to the base catalog so that this is always up to date. You don't have to use that model, but we've just found that it works really well. So now I'm going to move across into the Swiftus application. So this is a Windows desktop application. It's really lightweight. It's about 20 megabytes in total. It doesn't need a developer machine. It just needs a Windows machine that has access to your E1 or Cloud Apps instance. So what we can see here is a list of all of the projects, settings, scenarios, and tests that we saw in the hub. This is the one that we're going to use today, this testing project. We're going to do some testing around the general ledger. So I'm going to go up to our base catalog, to our general ledger scenario, and I'm going to start grabbing some of these tests. So this is a test which is going to create a journal entry. Very small test, almost like a little unit test, create a journal entry, and it's going to store the batch number that's created. And then this test here is going to take the batch status and update this to pending. This is going to update the status to approved. This one will post it. And this one will void the posted journal. So here we've got a bunch of tests, nicely written, small, almost like unit tests that are just concerned about doing one thing, creating a journal entry, saving the batch number. Another one's going to update the status, post it, and then void it. So with these tests, we can test quite a nice little chunk out of the GL system. So I'm going to execute this test, and then I'll talk you through what it's doing as the test is running. Okay, so the very first thing that's going to do is going to check if we've got an open session to E1, and we don't. So it's going to throw open a new browser. It's going to log in with settings that I've set up at project level, but you could override those at design time or at runtime. Now that we logged in, it's going to open up P0911 with the default version. Then it's going to click add, and then it's going to load some data from the repository data store. I'll come back to that in just a minute, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. But once it's got data from the repository data store, it's going to enter the header information, and it's going to create 2 grid rows. And once it's finished with that, it'll click the OK button. That'll generate us a new batch. And then we're going to store the batch number that is generated here in the runtime data store, which is separate to the repository data store. And then because it's a good test, it's going to close down all of the applications that it opened, and it's going to log out just to clean up after itself. Okay, so we've got 2 types of data stores in Swiftest. The first one is the repository data store, and that's a really good place to store master information, like a list of item, business units, customers, any data that your tests need to consume. But it's also a really good place to store something like this, like a GL date. So, you know, depending on your testing processes, you know, maybe you're testing dev or PY, and as part of that, maybe you copy production data to one of those environments before you do testing. You know, in an environment like dev or PY, the GL date probably isn't going to be moving on very often, whereas production, it's, you know, moving on every month. So if you were to hard code your tests that you write in dev or PY with a date like that, and then suddenly you update the data, then you would have to go through and update that in all of your tests where it's hard coded. Much better thing to do is to create a repository, and you can think of a repository like a spreadsheet. You can create as many columns in the spreadsheet and as many rows as you want. You know, it's a good idea to create a repository which would contain these sort of semi-permanent constant type information like a GL date that you can just point all your tests to it. When that data changes, you just update in one place to the repository, and that'll filter through to all your tests. The other repository is the other data store is the runtime data store. And this is used to grab information from the page as the test is running. And then you can use that information later on the same test, or you can pass it to another test like we're doing here to update the status, depending approved, posted, and then voided. Okay, so you can see here that we store quite a lot of information as the test is running. We pick up things like the application, the version, and the form. So here you can see when we click to add, this suddenly took us to a new form. This is really interesting information because you can use this to see where you have tests and where you may be missing tests and need to build those out. We keep track of how long this action took, who ran it, did it pass, did it fail. We take screenshots after every action. So make this bigger. You know, at a high level, you can sort of follow the test down to see what it looked like, how it was running. And as I said earlier, Swiftest is self-documenting. So if we go back to the hub, all of this information is stored in our secure cloud. So it's accessible from the hub, but it means you can also generate reports from here as well. These can be generated. This is a PDF that I generated a little bit earlier. You can generate this output as PDF, as a Word document, or as a spreadsheet. And some of our clients are using this as a basis for their training manuals as well. You know, this was written to be test execution history, but it does kind of tell you exactly how to enter a journal entry. You know, these are the steps, enter this date here, this is what it looks like. And especially with outputting to a Word document, you know, it's easy to edit. So maybe you find that useful or maybe not, but if it's there, if you can use it. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to create a test from scratch. So I've got a test here, create sales order, and we're going to start adding some actions to this test. So we've got actions for just about everything you can do in JDE. We've got common actions that you enter form value, enter grid value, things like that. We've got login actions, fastest path, log out. You can create a pause for either a certain amount of time or for a user input. Maybe that user's got to test something outside of cloud applications or outside of JD Edwards. And there's a space there to write a note to the user about what they should be testing, and a space for them to respond about why they might be passing or failing the test at that point. There's also these actions which let you add a bit of programmability to your tests. So you can create a group and add actions to that group, and maybe those group actions would post a batch. But maybe at that point in the test, the batch might already be posted. So you don't want the test to fail at that point. You're just going to condition this group to say, if the batch status is not posted, then these are the actions that we should run to post the batch, and then the test can continue. So you can also do whiles and repeats, which is very useful if you've got a group of data in the repository data store, maybe like the contents of a sales order detail grid, and you want to copy those and paste those into the sales order detail grid. You would repeat over that data and insert a row into the grid for each row in the repository. You can add comments. There's an action to interact with the JD orchestrator as well, which is quite handy. You can send emails. We've got a bunch of actions around form controls and clicking buttons and passwords and visual assists around the grid and QBE lines and things like that. You can also interact with application menus and form controls, form exits and row exits, tabs, batch applications. You can set processing options and data selection, E1 pages, E1 menus. These are actions to get data in and out of the data stores and also to perform numeric, date, and string calculations. And you can also interact with media objects and personalizations as well. But as Pat said earlier, we built Swiftest specifically for JD Edwards and now for Cloud Apps. So Swiftest is context aware. It knows where you are in those two applications and what you're doing. So it knows right now that we aren't even logged in to E1. So if I turn on this filtering option, it's going to hide all of the actions that we can't perform right now and just show us what we can actually perform. And these are the only two E1 actions we can perform, logging in or logging in with a different role. These other actions we could run without a browser being open, like sending an email or loading data from the data stores or something like that. But these are the actions we need to perform to open a session to E1. So it's going to ask us which URL, user, password, environment. These are just going to come from the project, but we could also override them now. So once I execute that, that'll give us a new browser. And now Swiftest realizes that we've logged in. We're at the home page. So now we can do things like launch an application from FastPath, or we could log out, or we could launch a UBE or interact with E1 pages or menus. I'm just going to launch P4210 and my version of that. And once this application is open, we're going to realize that there's actually even more things we can interact now, because we've got a grid, we've got form controls, we've got menu items and tabs. So I'm going to use this add button to take us to the revision screen. And then what I want to do is set the branch plant to a value of 30. So I'm going to use the enter form value action. This is going to read everything that's on the page. You can see base is suddenly turned red there. That's because base is the first item that's available in this dropdown. So it's reading everything that's on the page and it's giving it to you easily accessible through a dropdown. So there's no technical skills that you need to know to use Swiftest. If you know how to enter a sales order in E1, with a little bit of training, you'll be able to enter a sales order with Swiftest. And this works just as well with modifications. Anything that you can do in the case tool set, so forms design aid, reports design aid, any of those tools, we can interact with those and you can create tests around those. So once I choose branch plant here, that's going to change the form control to be highlighted so we know which one we're changing. I don't want to append, I just want to override any text that might already be in there, and I want to use a specific value. So I could also grab this data from the repository data store, but I'm just going to hard code it for this demo. So I'll execute this. That will enter the value in the form control. and it'll tell E1 to execute the event rules behind this form control. So you can see it's formatted that nicely. It's also validated it. It's brought back the company up here and the currency down there. But it's also looking for errors on the page. So something like that. If Swifter sees an error like this that it's not expecting, that will cause the test to fail. But you can also create negative tests, like maybe there is actually a branch plant X, but my user, my role doesn't have access, and that's actually what you want to test. So in that case, the test will only fail if you don't get the error. But that's also not the only metric for a test passing or failing. You can also grab data from the page like we did with the batch number. So imagine an example where you've modified the advanced pricing master business function. And you know that if you're going to order create a sales order with this item and this customer on this business unit on this day with this quantity, you should get this price. So you can create a bunch of sales orders with Swiftest and then grab the data, the base price or whatever price out of the grid after the sales order has been created, and then compare that that's equal to the expected value. And you could take that a step further and soft code everything so that you know, the data you're using and the expected data are soft coded. So then as that changes, you're just updating data. You don't have to change the tests at all. So hopefully this gives you a taste of how we write tests. It's very granular, very action, you know, built up action by action. But we think that this is a much better way to create tests. This isn't a record and playback. This is Swiftest driving E1 rather than you know, you doing something and your actions being recorded. Record and playback is, you know, it's fine. It's got its pros and cons, but by far the biggest con and the reason why we think that this is a much better way to create tests is it creates these very brittle tests where when things change in an E1, they change all the time. Unless you're quite technical, depending on the tool you're using, you know, very often with record and playback, you just have to take your whole test and throw it away and re-record the whole thing from scratch, and it's just a huge waste of time. Whereas doing something like this with Swiftest, you know, it's very easy to change this when things change. You know, I can just edit this action directly. You know, maybe for whatever reason, this has changed from 30 to M30 and I need to update my test. Or maybe I'm creating a second test, which is very similar to the previous test I just created, and then I can grab, you know, different actions and copy and paste them into a different test, or copy the whole test and make slight tweaks to it. We think that this is a much better way to create maintainable tests that are easy to use, easy to update, and as a result, you're going to do more testing just because in the long term it is a lot easier. Okay, so next up, I just want to talk about test queues. So this is how you would chain tests together to test something more significant in the system. So this is the same example that we were looking at earlier. We've got a queue here, which is going to create a journal entry, save the batch number, update the status depending, approve it, post it, and then void it. But imagine you had to test this for all of the different journal entries types that you had. You know, you've got model and foreign and intercompany and whatever. You know, imagine that there's 10 of them. If you're using record and playback, you've got to record that whole process end to end 10 times. But here you can reuse tests 2 to 5. You don't have to re-record those. All you have to do is create 10 queues and swap out the first test in each queue and add tests 2 to 5, and you've saved yourself a huge chunk of time. And then when something changes, you know, in this test, maybe we've got to enter a password now, some change from Oracle. All you would have to do is go into this test 3, add the change, and that affects all of the tests. Or if you were in a regulated environment, maybe you don't want that. Maybe you could copy this test, create a 056A version, and then in the test queue, go and pull out the old versions of the tests, pop in the new one, and then you know, you've still saved a huge amount of time. And lastly, there's also a scheduler that does everything you'd expect a scheduler to do. You can run test after hours when people aren't around. It's also just really handy to have a place somewhere else to run tests, because you create these tests, you build them up on your machine, you put them in these big test queues, but you maybe just don't want to watch them run. So in that case, you can palm them off onto a scheduling agent and just check the results afterwards. And you can also run Swift tests from the command line. So you can build it into your CI/CD processes, so that after a deployment happens as part of a script, it can pop open and execute some test queues which would test your key business processes. And there is also an open API which lets you do the same thing and update repository data and things like that. And that's about it from me.
Yeah, that's great, Sean. Thank you very much. I'll remind everybody at this point that if you want to reach out to us and see the software again or in more detail, or have us answer questions very particular to your requirements, while looking at the software, just reach out to us and let us know, and we'll be happy to organize sessions and spend more time with folks in the software. There also is, at this point, a reminder for me about the question box over in the right-hand side in the control panel. You can go in there and you can key questions in for us, and we'll see those and we'll respond to those at the end of at the end of the webinar. So I'll encourage anyone that has a question for this session to ping things out there. I'll take back control as a presenter, and I will share my screen and go back into slideshow mode. So we've seen the software. We've talked about we've talked about pretty much everything that that we wanted. We advertise in on the agenda. You've seen Swift test now, and Swift test is different. In the first 2 points, I think I've probably said twice, if not 3 times already. The third point, that makes Swift test different, is really important, is the the self-documenting nature of the solution. The test execution results that Sean showed, are invaluable as an audit, from an audit perspective. But as he said, they can, the output can be saved as a Word document or as an Excel spreadsheet, and you can you can use Word or Excel to create user documentation or system documentation or what have you. And you'll have noticed, I hope, that there wasn't anything particularly technical about what Sean was doing. There is no separate developer studio. You don't need to be a technician or a programmer. And we highlighted the fact that the software has that separation between data and the scripting, and with the dynamic data stores. And we haven't mentioned that earlier this year we went through an ISO certification process, or I should say, for the last couple of years we've been preparing for ISO certification, and earlier this year we got ISO accreditation. So we're a provider that is ISO certified, which is quite important, and it is great for DWS and our customers. There is a tremendous amount of savings. I mean, if you think about how much time is saved when executing, it's up to 60%, we reckon, based on desktop test exercises that we've gone through, and based on what we hear our customers tell us. But it's not just an executional savings. You do invest time creating scripts, but you get back very quickly, on that investment, because you're able to, copy, replicate, change, and you can save a tremendous amount of time, writing and creating scripts, probably even more than you can from an executional perspective. So, those are 2 cost saving, time saving benefits that we always point to. in summary, we're talking about getting you guys, your companies you work for, and the teams, that are doing JD Edwards projects to test smarter. Improve the quality of the testing you're doing, do the testing at a faster pace, quicker, and spend less time and energy. And when we think about the time and energy, it's the energy and time of the consultants that you're working with, the project team members, that make up the team to do whatever project it is that you're doing, and the end users that you bring in at the end of the process to do the to review the testing that's been done and to do their end user acceptance testing. We summarized our thoughts on the value of test automation and created an ebook that's available on our website. We have a resource page on DWS-global.com. I encourage everybody to go out there. And at this point, I will turn this over to the audience and invite Herring back. Are you there still hearing for any questions?
Yep.
See what comes through. I can see one having come through that asks about testing security and the setup of your security on JD Edwards. And the short answer is yes. You can do positive and negative testing. So you could run a test that you expect to fail if the user doesn't have the right isn't of the right profile or doesn't have the right role or something like that. So yeah, absolutely, you can do that sort of thing. And I think Sean talked about testing for expected results and that sort of stuff during the presentation as well. So that's hopefully answered that question. Do you see another one out there, Hearing, that you wanna pick one from the list and either pose the question to me or read the question and provide the answer, whichever way you want to do it? Have you got another one?
Yeah, and the one with the security was interesting. It's also the difference between testing the software changes in a general way, like an admin. But of course, if you have different people in different countries, you also want to test changes that for Dutch users is different than for Belgium users, of course. So very interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing was I popped up with a question at the customer who's saying, okay, DWS is based in JD Edwards. So if I have changes in customization, of course, you can test it yourself, because Sean showed us we can call any application within JD Edwards.
Yeah.
What is the question was what's that with embedded software like RF Smart, because it is a third-party application.
Yeah.
But for the users, it's similar to JD Edwards.
Yeah, it's a good question. We do get a lot of questions from companies, because most everyone's IT environments are quite complex. JD Edwards doesn't exist on its own. And JD Edwards is integrated with other applications, whether it's a storefront or a supply chain warehouse management, RF Smart type thing, DSI type thing. We can't test those applications within SwiftTest, okay? But SwiftTest has interoperability features and capabilities, for people that are at at a standard service tier. We have an open API, and we also deliver to all of our customers actions that allow scripts to work with orchestrations. So you can use the interoperability features and orchestration capabilities, our ability to interact with orchestrations to address some of those kind of requirements, Hearing, whether it's from a barcode scanning system, into JD Edwards, you can do things that address those sorts of requirements. So that's a good question, and it's one that we always get answered. Something I remind people of is, what we're testing and what we're able to test with Swift Test, whether it's JD Edwards or Oracle Cloud applications, is what a user can do when they're sitting in front of a screen with a keyboard, basically. That's what, you could see Sean doing, using the Swift Test client, interacting with an instance of JD Edwards in this example, in this demo today, but it could be an instance of Oracle Cloud Apps. We're doing that interaction and we're testing that application. So hopefully that answered it here. And does that answer the question well enough for you? Do you think that's going to satisfy the audience?
Yeah, I think so. And also with the increasing functionality with updates of JD Edwards, DWS testing is increasing its capabilities as well. Looking at orchestration, looking at all kinds of features with form extensions, etc.
Yeah, and in relation to this, somebody else has popped up and said, well, what about something like Jira, which is a test management, solution. It does all sorts of things here. But yeah, that's exactly what the APIs and interoperability capabilities that we've been adding to Swift Tester for. Swift Test in very complex environments, might not be the only scripting and automation solution you use. You might have more than one scripting and automation solution, and you may want to do a script and automation test of one application that leads into a script and testing within JD Edwards that goes on to testing in another system. And if you're doing testing and you have a failure, you might ask Swift Test, to send a message or create a ticket, that needs to be worked by somebody else in another system. We're doing that sort of stuff and enabling that sort of stuff with the APIs. The other question that popped up that that we almost always get is sort of about, how you buy the stuff and how's the software made commercially available, I guess is sort of the way I'd kind of paraphrase the question. But the software, as you saw, is cloud-based. Sean did show the Swift Test client, which runs on a laptop or a PC or something, a virtual machine, and test your instance of cloud applications or JD Edwards. But everything that you're doing with the client is backed up and available in the Dimension Hub in the cloud. So the software is available as a service, and you pay a subscription fee, an annual subscription fee per user. And just to give you an idea of the cost, we intentionally have tried to price it quite aggressively. It's quite the price per user is quite attractive. We charge $5,000 per test user per annum. So that's a question that's been asked, and that people are always sort of interested in. I don't see anything else. Anybody have anything else?
Well, just to be clear, if you say that you have a big company with more than 400 JD Edwards users, yep, and you buy one 5,000 annual test user, you can at the end test for all those 400 users.
That's right. I mean, what we have here, and exactly right, we have some very big customers, that have thousands of users, and they don't, have more than 25 or 30 Swift Test licenses. So yeah, we're not talking about the end users. We're talking about the test users, if you will. And anybody that buys 5 or more users of Swift Test, so full users of Swift Test, is coming in at what we call our standard service tier. And at the standard service tier, our customers get all of the interoperability features and functions that we touched on during the presentation. But listen, I'm conscious that we're right up at the end of the hour. Herring, I want to thank you, for joining us today and adding to our presentation. I think it was very interesting to
You're welcome.
About your use of Swift Test and how you use Swift Test with your to help your customers. I think that was good. Hopefully everybody liked that. So thank you, and thank you, Sean, as well.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. We'll sign off now. Have a good day, the rest of your
Have a
day.
good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.